Hello and welcome. My name is JR Santos Diaz, and I'm joined here by my wonderful counterpart, Christine Wang. We both work on the app agency team here at Google, where we partner with agencies focused on or interested in mobile apps as one of their offerings. Together, our backgrounds span both the buy side and sell side of advertising, and today we're excited to deep dive into the mobile app advertising world through the lens of Google. And before we start, just to give you some context of our team, in looking at what we specifically focus on. So in terms of three pillars here and what our team is focused on, it's business development, account management, and executive support and technical know-how. So you may know this, and it's similar to what you had with your web offerings, but we do something very similar where our main intention is really to fuel your agency for short and long-term growth. So in terms of the agenda today, I'll first walk us through a high-level overview of the mobile app ecosystem and how it's evolved. Then Christine will take the reins and cover UAC and machine learning and UAC best practices. And finally, we'll discuss how your agency can partner with our app agency team. So looking first at mobile app ecosystem overview. So when you look at the current state of apps, we've seen it grow rapidly over the past decade. Apps have really allowed partners to diversify their offering and allow advertisers to achieve success. When you think about how apps benefit advertisers, it really falls into four buckets: loyalty, relationships, accessibility, and functionality. And so apps can offer direct and repeatable access to your customers to build loyalty with them or improve your customer relationship with additional services. In many, but not all cases, an app is the preferred way for a user to interact with you due to easier accessibility or due to an exclusive or additional functionalities the app offers to it. So to be able to assess if an app is valuable to an advertiser, you really need to think about the context of what the user is, what the problem is solving for. So what are valuable actions for your customers and how do they matter? Does app success align with the overall success of the business? And is improving an app experience worth it? So looking at what the data says, while we know apps are growing pretty significantly, I think it's important to look at the specifics of this data. So on the left side, you'll see some historical data of trends that occurred over the past 8 years. As you can see, every year has shown strong growth in both downloads and gross revenue, which is really exciting. So in terms of forecasting for where the future goes, the market feels super bullish on that apps will continue to have these big growth markets. And so, in fact, when the market continues to grow at an impressive rate, one of our partners, App Annie, forecasts that the app economy will surpass 100 billion in gross revenue by 2020, and that's over the next 5 years. So it's really exciting stuff. And with that, I'll hand it over to Christine, who will talk a little bit more on the next section for understanding Google's app offering and UAC and the concept of machine learning.
Awesome. Thanks, JR. So looking into UAC and machine learning, as JR just alluded to, marketing an app has become a lot more challenging these days, especially with the market being so saturated. With over 2 million apps right now in the Google Play Store, as well as on the Apple App Store, we know that discoverability is harder. And as your job as a marketer, complexity is increasing when you're really trying to find the most qualified user and the most valued users. So above all, lifetime value is something that's really critical to kind of the long-term success of your app's business moving forward, and something that we definitely need to consider, again, with any of your kind of app initiatives. So kind of knowing that landscape, we know that not all installs or users are equal. So it's really important for us to identify who those valuable users are. If you look at this slide here, you can see that within this app ecosystem, only 17% of users are generating the majority of the revenue that we see within apps. So with that being said, again, it's really important that we're looking at really efficient ways to target these valuable users to ultimately drive higher retention and value for your app. Awesome. So getting into kind of universal app campaigns and machine learning, to really help find these valuable users that we just alluded to earlier, UAC really enables advertisers to take this audience-first approach to find users really in the right moment and context across all of Google's different networks. So today we're going to do a deep dive into how UAC works and what the benefits it can bring for your business, and some of the UAC best practices to have in line to make sure that we're steering the machine to drive the best results for your clients. Cool. So taking a look here at targeting and how does machine learning work and kind of what signals does it use to find the right users? When you think back on more traditional targeting, you usually think of, one-dimensional proxies like age, gender, device, category. What geo-targeting are we putting in place? But those proxies are only really giving you one small piece of the pie, right? It's not really painting you a holistic picture of what this user behavior really is like. And so with machine learning, we can now have the capability of using multi-dimensional signals like app usage, time of day, what their browsing activity looks like, what search queries have they been looking for in the past, and does this user have certain apps installed on their phone that we care about? So using multi-dimensional signals like that, we can actually paint a more holistic picture of a user's behavior, and then again cast that wider net to make sure that we're not missing out on a lot of these qualified users. And so consequently, this really does enable for more precise and relevant targeting, as opposed to taking a more manual approach and figuring out exactly what age or gender or demo we want to target.
And just to piggyback off of that, I think when you looked at it before, there were just hundreds of signals that as an agency or as an advertiser, you really had to consider when looking to optimize. But the way and looking how we make more precise targeting, it's now reached a stage where it's over about 300 million signals. And so it's very complex for any human to really factor and achieve the most optimal setup. And so that's why we feel very confident in machine learning to really execute a plan for marketers.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for that, JR. That's a really good point to add. And then kind of looking at, all of these different user signals and combining it with your ultimate KPIs and what your ultimate goals are for your app. UAC's machine learning algorithm, or what we actually call conversion optimizer, it actually builds a pattern behind the specific user profile that you're looking to target. And then it really determines the right moment and context to show your ad. Essentially, we're putting your user insights and your KPIs at the core of each campaign. And again, because we can run across all of Google's different owned and operated networks, like search, display, and YouTube, we're really making sure that we're catching those users when they're in the right mindset of converting. Here is just a quick snapshot of just kind of the different inventory that we can run on with UAC. And now that we are more familiar with the different user signals that UAC uses, we can take a look at kind of what that inventory looks like, and again, what are the different networks that we can have a presence on. So if you take a look at the slide here, you can actually see that we do have inventory across Google Play. So if you're looking at like search inventory, that's across google.com. Again, also on Google Play. And now we have added inventory on the Google Play homepage as well. We also have in-app ads via AdMob, as well as the Google Display Network. And then for any of your video assets, we can run that again across YouTube. And then we also have promoted ads within Gmail as well. So again, using the millions of user signals that Conversion Optimizer is able to gather across these networks, it can really predict the right context and time to serve your ad to a really qualified user. Cool. So what do you want to focus on? Again, as we mentioned before, we're really putting your KPIs at the forefront of a universal app campaign. So really depending on what your ultimate goals are, there are several iterations of UAC that are available. So just to at a high level, we have the UAC for installs campaign. What does that campaign look like? Essentially, if you imagine it like a scale, with the right side of the scale being, really high volume of users, and the left side of the scale being really high quality. A UAC for installs campaign is essentially finding users at really high volume and not necessarily taking so much into account the particular action that user is going to take. So, again, on that scale, we're really skewing to the right of that. Again, just trying to find as many users as possible at your target cost per install. Kind of in the middle of that is the installs advanced campaign. And the difference here between an installs advanced campaign versus an installs campaign is that an installs advanced campaign actually it not only still bids at your target cost per install, but we're now actually taking into account a specific in-app action that we're optimizing towards, as opposed to an installs, which is just looking at top line max installs. So with installs advanced, if you think about that scale, we're still getting pretty decent volume, but the meter is now kind of more in the middle, where we're taking into account a little bit more quality of users as well. And then lastly, kind of the newest iteration of UAC is the UAC for Actions campaign. And this campaign type really focuses, again, a lot more on quality as opposed to volume. And now, instead of bidding on a target cost per install, we're actually now optimizing towards users who are going to take a specific action within your app and bidding on them at your target cost per action. So again, looking a lot more at quality as opposed to volume. And there are certain best practices to have in place, which we will cover later on. But also want to note here that if you are running multiple UAC campaigns, these campaigns are not mutually exclusive, meaning that you can run more than one UAC campaign at a time. It just really depends on what your overall goals are. And I think something to note is, if you are kind of running more than one campaign, you want to make sure that you're staggering your bids accordingly. So, really bidding higher for the actions that matter most to your business, and then really kind of playing around and testing to see what drives the most results for your app's business.
And when you think about what to choose for this specifically, so there are 3 options. And I think when Christine mentioned, obviously there's max installs, so you're optimizing for different users, or if you're optimizing for actions, that takes into consideration adding something to a cart, buying something. If it's a game, reaching a certain level. And so I think Installs Advanced is a really good segue into looking at going beyond just the basic install itself, where if someone is considering where they want to start optimizing for LTV, or if they have both a primary and secondary goal, that obviously Google is able to achieve the install, but also factor in the specifics of, let's say, adding something to a cart or purchasing as a secondary goal.
Yeah, so that's actually a really great transition here into the next slide. Machine learning essentially works across all verticals, and we understand, that every app is different, and across different verticals, each app is going to have different types of events that matter to that business. And as JR just mentioned, gaming. A gaming app might have, actions that are more around the concept of achieving a certain level within the game, or finishing an in-app purchase within the game. And on the other hand, we have e-commerce apps that might be more interested in concept of searches and really adding items to their shopping cart. So understandably, these things vary, but ultimately, what your client's app goals are, and you should, make sure that you're thinking about these user experiences when you are choosing in-app events that are important to achieving those goals. So that kind of leads us into the next segment here, just around measurement and attribution. So, when we talk about tracking in-app events, or even just tracking installs, there's one thing that really differentiates app attribution versus web attribution. For any of you that are familiar with web attributions, you're really familiar with the concept of cookies and using pixels and tags placed on websites to make sure that you're tracking all of the conversions that are coming in. With app attribution, we don't use cookies at all. We use device identifier-based basically metrics. Like for Android, it's an ad ID, and for iOS, it's an IDFA. Essentially, these are more of a one-to-one user match, as opposed to relying on something like a cookie. And instead of using like pixels or tags, we actually rely on an SDK or a system development kit, for anyone who's not familiar with that term. So before you're really engaging with paid user acquisition, it's important to make sure that you have the right kind of tracking parameters in place to make sure you're getting all of that conversion data and making sure that you're understanding kind of what's converting the best for your app, so that we can leverage all of that moving forward with UAC. And taking a deeper dive here into which tracking solutions work for UAC, there's really a few levels here, really depending on how ready your app's business is and kind of what's the best fit for your business. With Google Play codeless tracking, this is kind of really the easiest way to kind of get a campaign up and running if for any reason you're not ready yet to use a third-party app attribution partner. This is actually, it doesn't require any SDK at all. And if your app is already uploaded to the Play Store, you already automatically have Google Play codeless tracking, and essentially it's just tracking Android installs, not necessarily first opens or anything like that. But it's a really good way to start in the case that, again, you're not really ready yet to use a third party. With Firebase, this is a Google-owned and operated tracking platform. We can track iOS and Android installs in this instance. We can also track first opens. Again, the difference between an install versus a first open, an install is just when a user clicks on the install button, and we track that conversion, whereas a first open might be a little bit more qualified in the fact that we know that the user not only downloaded the app and it's on their phone, but we know that they also open the app so that there's a level of engagement there already. So it's a little bit more qualified. With Firebase, a differentiator here between Firebase and some of the other third-party attribution partners is that it doesn't track Facebook or iOS search. So for example, if you're running any media across Facebook or any of those other social channels, we won't be able to get any of that data in. So that is just something to consider if you are also running with those partners. And then lastly, with any of our third-party attribution partners like a Kochava, AppsFlyer, Tune, Adjust, or Appsolar, these are really the third parties that not only track Facebook, but it also tracks iOS search. They have unlimited look-back windows, and they dedupe across networks. They can also track a lot of the in-app events, first opens, and it really does give kind of a more holistic picture of the campaigns that you're running. So each partner, again, has like different ways of attributing conversions. So it's really just dependent on what your overall goals are and kind of what's the best fit for your business at the moment. Cool. So just going into some best practices with UAC. It's really important that when you're running a UAC campaign, regardless if it's just for installs or for actions, that you're setting the right daily budget. And really what that means is, if you're running a UAC for installs campaign or you're running a UAC for installs advanced campaign, it's recommended that you set your minimum daily budget to at least 50 times your target cost per install. The reason for that really is just to essentially help Conversion Optimizer achieve the scale it needs in order to find the most qualified users across all networks. If you're starting at maybe too low of a bid or too low of a daily budget, there's just not enough scale for Conversion Optimizer to, again, get that user data that it needs to make the most predictive, to make the smartest predictions, basically. And then for your UAC for Actions campaign, it's recommended that you start your minimum daily budget at 10 times your target cost per action. Again, let's say, for example, that your target cost per action is $20, then we would recommend setting that minimum daily budget to at least 200. Again, that's also just to help Conversion Optimizer get enough scale to find users who are most likely going to take that particular action. Cool, so selecting a relevant in-app action. This is something really important to consider. So if you're ever running kind of a UAC for Actions campaign, it's important that you're picking events that are happening frequently enough within your app so that, again, Conversion Optimizer has enough data to work off of. So with that being said, it's important to select in-app events that are maybe higher up in the funnel, but are also good indicators of a quality user. So let's say, for example, your ultimate goal with your app is to drive an in-app purchase. That's great that we're tracking that data, but maybe that purchase doesn't happen frequently enough for us to optimize towards just yet. So if that's the case, I really recommend you guys to do like a funnel mapping exercise where you're really taking into account what a user does post-install, right? So is there any registration event that happens after the install? Is there subscription that they can take right after the install? Any kind of higher funnel metric here would be a really good proxy to tell us that, one, this is a really quality user, but two, it also allows us to get a little bit more scale to find those qualified users because that action, again, is happening more frequently than, say, an in-app purchase. So again, I think really defining what those in-app events are really important to a UAC campaign, and then ultimately driving that user down the purchase funnel. That's just a requirement, again, for UAC for Actions. Just something that you want to consider moving forward. Cool. Expect changes even if you initiate them. So with Universal App Campaigns, again, because we are using Conversion Optimizer and we're using these millions of user signals, it's important to remember to kind of keep your changes no greater than 20% increments. And what that means is, if you're making any kind of big bid adjustments or budget adjustments, you want to make sure that you're doing them in smaller increments. So only increasing your bid, by 20% until you hit that requirement of getting 100 conversions, and then increasing again your bid by another 20% until you hit whatever your target cost per install is. That goes to say that's not just for increasing your bid or budget, but that's also for decreasing. So let's say we're wanting to lower your bid in any way. You want to make sure you're doing that again, no greater than 20%, just because you don't want Conversion Optimizer to revert back to the learning stage. Because let's say we're changing our bid too drastically, within a day's time. Conversion Optimizer essentially has to now, participate in a lot of other auctions that it wasn't able to prior, and basically gather a lot of that data that it didn't have before. So you're going to see that Conversion Optimizer is going to go back into learning, and it's going to take maybe another 7 or so days to really evaluate the performance and kind of see the scale ramp back up. In terms of creative, creative is one of the kind of big levers that UAC that you can leverage within a UAC campaign. And because UAC, again, runs across all of Google's networks like search, display, and YouTube, I think it's really important to utilize all the creative slots if possible and have a really healthy asset mix to make sure that we're allowing Conversion Optimizer, again, to have as much scale as possible to serve your ad. So with any universal app campaign, there are 4 text assets or 4 lines of text that we allow, 20 image assets and 20 video assets. Understandably, sometimes we're not able to have all 20 image assets readily available. And if that's the case, there are actually some priority sizes within this realm that we recommend having. And those dimensions really are just the more popular inventory sizes that we see within the auction. So even if you don't have all 20, having the top 10 at least will kind of get you into a lot of that available inventory as well. I want to note also for any video assets, if you don't have kind of any custom made or creative video assets, we do have Auto Director, which is kind of like an internal tool to help create videos using your Play Store description as well as using your Play Store screenshots. And this is more of just a templated kind of video that will still serve in the place of any other video assets that you have. But again, it's always best, I think, for if you're able to kind of put your look and feel with your video assets. It's a great way for branding, but it's also a great way to see better engagement and ultimately better performance with a UAC campaign.
And just to jump in here, for this specifically, I think creatives is a huge lever that you as an agency or as an advertiser can really position yourself for success. And so again, we encourage using the maximum, but if you're unable to, we do have recommended sizes. So feel free to reach out to our team. We'll make sure to share our contact information. So just making a plug there to reach out, and we're happy to work through this with you later to see what's the best way to set up the campaign for success.
Awesome. Cool. So taking a deeper dive now into kind of the text assets and some best practices. With text, it's obviously really important to highlight some of those unique value propositions within your app. And because Conversion Optimizer is actually taking different forms of your assets and testing out different combinations, you want to also make sure that you're writing standalone lines so that, even if only one text line is served, maybe alongside a display asset, the user is still able to get a good idea of, what your value prop is and what your app's capabilities are. So just some best practices here in terms of text. We recommend having one line that basically just describes, what does your app do? Don't say the same thing twice, because that's just kind of a waste of, utilizing a text line. Have one exclamation mark, and then definitely have a really clear call to action. So again, that users are, they understand exactly what your app's doing and that you want them to download the app and that it's available or whatever it may be.
And for this here, for those who are familiar in web or who have extensive experience doing web advertising, it's the same principles that you would adopt. And so make sure to carry those over when creating app campaigns as well.
Awesome. Going into image assets, again, just a few best practices here. I think for image, make sure again that you're clearly highlighting your value prop, including clear CTAs. And I think what's also really important is using recognizable App Store icons and brand icons, right? The more that you can include your app and your brand within your creative assets is a great way for brand recognition and brand awareness. Uploading high quality images is always key. That's just a really good user interface in general. And then keeping things really clear and legible is key here as well. Again, with image assets, there are those kind of priority sizes in the case that you're not able to create all 20 images. And that's something, again, that we can always follow up with too if you're interested in learning more about that. Awesome. And then lastly, with video, there are kind of a variety of assets that we recommend having. And I think one of the key things to call out here is to really include both portrait and landscape video. Because again, we're running across different types of video inventory. Having a mix and a kind of diverse set of videos is really important. So for YouTube, we're all familiar with the 16:9 ratio landscape video. But let's say we're serving on AdMob inventory, for example. For the most part, a user is going to have their phone kind of vertical and upright as we naturally hold it. And so if there's an available ad slot there and you have a portrait video, we're able to serve in that inventory. And it actually provides for a really good kind of user experience because the user doesn't have to really manipulate the way that they're holding the phone. It's just very kind of organic and really seamless. So definitely recommend including portrait and again, landscape videos to your universal app campaigns. Second point here is to produce creatives of different lengths, 15s, 30s, 60s. We also have bumper ads that are just 6 seconds. So just finding creative ways to tell a story within your video assets is a great way to kind of, again, mix and match with your video creative. Third, show your brand early on. So this is super important. As I think as we're all aware, when sometimes you're on YouTube or, sometimes you might have a skippable ad where, maybe a user doesn't stick around for the entire length of your video asset. That way, it's really important to show your brand really early on in the video. I think ideally, the first 5 seconds is really that key moment where you want to catch your user's eye, make sure your brand and your app icon is, in the video asset, again, just to have that brand recognition. And then using a really clear call to action as a conclusion. And what that means, so with any of your kind of video assets, there's going to be an end card that shows up once the video is about to end, making sure that you have a clear call to action in terms of, download the app or, learn more about the app here. Just making sure, again, that your users are aware of what that clear CTA is. And then lastly, design for sound on and off environments. I think this is really key. There are environments where maybe sound isn't automatically turned on. And if that's the case, you don't want to rely on that aspect of the creative to catch a user's eye, right? If the sound is off, you want to make sure that the creative is also visually appealing and that, it still tells a story even without any of that sound on. So making sure that you're designing for both of those environments.
Great. So before we go into questions, we wanted to share the best way to contact our team. And this can be for various reasons. You want to learn more about Google's app install solutions. You want to better create a strategy or point of view on apps as an agency or as an advertiser. You want to get better support with an app client pitch, or there's maybe an appetite to form a partnership with Google's app agency team. So this is the best way to contact us. So feel free to send us a message. And right now, we'll shift to questions. Give me a second here.
Okay.
Cool. So the first question that we got in says here, can we pick and choose what network we show up on UAC?
So to answer that question, yes, or no, sorry, we can't pick and choose what networks we show up on UAC. Because we're using Conversion Optimizer and machine learning, we're not able to, we're basically taking a user-first approach, right? So we're not necessarily telling the machine exactly what network to go after. The machine's going to look at these user signals and then decide, okay, the most qualified user that's most likely to convert based off of their search intent, their browsing history, the other millions of signals that it's taking into account, maybe is currently on YouTube watching a video. So we're going to serve an ad there. So again, it's taking a lot of these signals and then casting that wider net across all of the networks to see what's converting the best and then really optimizing the campaign that way.
Great. Second question in says, how is Google differentiated from other networks? So I think we've kind of discussed this in our topic today. So looking at our owned and operated inventory, so Gmail ads, Google search, YouTube, those are really unique to Google that you're not going to be able to access anywhere else. And from a display network standpoint, this is something where for Google and our display network, it is very robust. And so we're able to achieve through banner ads or through in-app. And so that's something that I would say really differentiates us. And I'd say from a more simplistic standpoint, I think achieving either mobile app installs or optimizing for these various events, it really goes through with Google with ease. And so that's really the gist of universal app campaigns, that we want to simplify the process in the most effective way.
Awesome. Looks like we got another question here. How do you know how to best target UAC campaigns? For example, are we able to run multiple types of campaigns simultaneously? Yes, to answer that question, you can run multiple UAC campaigns together. Again, the only caveat to this is you want to make sure that you're staggering your bids accordingly. And I think the best strategy to decide what type of UAC campaign to run is really understanding what your ultimate goals are. So, maybe right now your primary goal is to drive installs, but really think about what your long-term goals are, right? So post-install, once we do have kind of this user base, is there a certain in-app action that you want users to be taking? Is your ultimate goal maybe, driving more value for your app? Is it a return on ad spend? Exactly what is that kind of goal that you have in mind? And based off of that, really mixing and matching your strategy with UAC, I think can be a really strong strategy. So you can always run, you can always test it out too. So run a UAC for installs campaign, get a lot of volume, and then, maybe run a UAC for installs advanced campaign, or even a UAC for actions campaign paired with the installs campaign, again, to not only keep the volume of users that you have coming into your app, but then now scouting for those more quality users who are more likely, again, to take that particular action within your app. So yes, you can definitely mix and match and run different. Would just be wary of any inventory cannibalization, and making sure that you're tailoring your campaigns to really fit, again, what your long-term goals are.
Awesome. And so I think that's time. So thank you all for tuning in. Again, just as another plug, feel free to reach out to this email to build a formal relationship or to learn more about how to better integrate this into your business. But again, thank you so much, and we'll see you soon for next week. I believe our counterpart Austin will be talking next.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.